I'm BBC Scotland's health correspondent Eleanor Bradford, and today I'm asking why many childless people choose to take the overseas route to pregnancy, all of them driven by a desperate desire to have a baby. Gwenda Burns of the Infertility Network would like to see treatment given higher priority.
In an ideal world, you would like an acceptable waiting time in each health board area and up to 3 cycles where it's going to be clinically effective. That is based on medical evidence. Whether you would be able to access treatment on the NHS depends on numerous factors. There is criteria such as age, which is up to the age of 40. Therefore, it would depend when you went in the waiting list of whether you could access that. Some health board areas at the moment are 2 cycles, some's 3 cycles. Your BMI will also come into it. If you have any children living in the home. So there is a lot of different elements that come into whether you will come under the criteria to receive NHS treatment.
But if you don't match that criteria, then you have to go privately. If you're on a long waiting list, you may reach the age of 40 before getting treatment, and then you're too old for the NHS anyway. So what do private clinics offer instead? Professor Richard Fleming of the Glasgow Centre for Reproductive Medicine.
Negligible delays, and I'd like to think that we offer a greater breadth of services, but fundamentally it's the same procedures that they'll be going through here as they would be in the NHS. We really have a very short waiting list for treatment because we've kept pace with the demand. That can't be said for donated eggs, of course, which the waiting list is well over a year for our own programme of egg donation. The age limit for NHS treatment doesn't apply in the private sector, and neither do a lot of the other restrictions. But if you're talking about donated eggs, then the age of the recipient is not a component in terms of whether it's going to be successful or not. It's the age of the donor that is the primary driver in that circumstance.
And all this, at home or abroad, has to be paid for by those seeking treatment. The Infertility Network published a list of costs, which says
the prices of private infertility treatment vary depending on the clinic and the regional location. Private treatment packages, including fertility drugs, scans and consultations across the UK, vary between £4,000 and £6,000, depending on the type of treatment needed and whether donor eggs are required. Fertility treatment packages under NHS funding may cost from £2,500 to £4,700, again according to need. It is also important for patients to consider the hidden costs of infertility treatment, such as time taken from work, travel expenses, and the cost of accommodation if the treatment is undertaken abroad.
In Barcelona, Dr. Raul Olivares ensures there are no hidden extras from his clinic.
The flat fee of €8,950. That includes everything. It includes the drugs, the donor fees, the donor screening, all the scans needed, treatment, lab, everything. We decided that it was maybe too stressful for patients, that on the day of the embryo transfer they should pay money. So we include everything.
And costs came pretty near the top of the list when Professor Lorraine Cully did her research.
Costs were important for people. Obviously, if your main motivation was that you needed a donor, that's the main reason for going overseas. Most people actually have to pay for their treatment. A lot of people that we spoke to had already had treatment in the UK. So these are not people on the whole suddenly deciding, I want a child now, I'm going to go overseas and get pregnant. They're people who've actually been through the system in the UK for quite a long period of time in some cases, and therefore had spent quite a lot of money.
Our anonymous patient has certainly spent a lot of money, £90,000 to date. And as we heard earlier, she's having one more try this year when she goes to Spain.
It's maybe just as well that the financial cost will be the thing that dictates in the end when we stop, and I suspect it will be this summer. We have to draw a line, we have to move on with our lives. In actual fact, I think it's more difficult making that decision to give up altogether than it is to keep going. But I think for our own sanity and for our own health, we have to draw a line this year. But at least when I'm older, I can look back and know that I did everything possible I could to have a family, and I can sleep at night knowing that we did everything humanly possible that we could.
And all that without any help from any source. Dr. Francoise Shenfield thinks that makes things even more difficult for these patients.
In many countries, you can go privately and you will have a state-funded insurance where you participate to a certain degree. In this country, there is no private insurance which covers fertility. And that's totally iniquitous. It's as if it was a dirty disease. It is not a dirty disease. It is a disease which affects people for a long, long time, because when all their friends have become grandparents and they can't because they haven't had children, it hurts again and again and again. So it is really unfair.
And the high costs mean that treatment is only possible for those who can raise the money somehow, by remortgaging their homes, by borrowing from families, or by selling whatever they can. For Professor Lorraine Cully, this is completely unacceptable.
I think this is one of the great kind of tragedies of the whole issue, actually. The people that participated in our study were, on the whole, middle-class people, well-educated, articulate people who had researched their intentions to travel quite substantially, which I think is actually quite interesting. But in terms of their socio-economic background, they were, not wealthy people on the whole, but certainly were able to kind of mobilise a certain amount of resources in order to do this. And I think the great tragedy is, of course, that's not something that everyone can do. So there are inequalities in relationship to the access to IVF generally, and the means to have a child.
In the future, it may be possible for donor eggs to be imported as a matter of course. It may be possible to teach young people that their fertility wanes sooner than they think. But at the moment, for health, emotional and financial reasons, treatment has to come to an end sometime. Gwenda Burns of the Infertility Network in Scotland.
Realistically, from a clinical point of view, after a certain age, your chances decrease and they become so minimal that there's got to be a cut-off age somewhere. Ideally, we would love to see everyone who had a fertility issue receive treatment, as long as it was going to be clinically effective, like any other form of treatment you would be given in any other field.